We're now going to take a look at what happens when we try to compare string objects and not just the data in the objects themselves. Now, if you remember when we were talking about creating strings, if we say something like str equals some text, that's the same thing as saying str equals new string, where we set the data to some text. Well, this is somewhat true. I'm not going to say that I completely lied to you, but it's not the complete truth. So, okay, yeah, I lied. Sorry. Here's what's going on. So if we run the second statement with the new string, we create a brand new string object no matter what. Now, if we run the first statement, the str equals some text in quotes, Java is going to check to see if that string object already exists. So it's going to check to see if there is some object that contains the text some text. And if this is true, then our string variable is going to point to that object instead of creating a brand new one. I mean, if that string already exists in our memory, there's not really much point in creating a brand new object with the same data. We can just have string contain the str contain the memory address of the object that's already created. Let's take a look at an example to show what's going on. So let's say I have two different string statements that both set it equal to hello. So string 1 is going to be hello and string 2 is going to be hello. The first statement is going to create the new string object. So we're going to assume that hello does not already exist somewhere in our memory. So it's going to pretty much do the same thing as doing new string and then passing hello. So we're going to create a new string object. Now the second statement is going to take a look and notice that there is already an object with hello in it. There's no need to create a brand new object. So string 2 is going to store the same address as string 1. What does that mean? It means that when we do our comparisons, if we check if string 1 equals string 2, here we're actually comparing the values in string 1 and string 2. And since those are memory addresses, we are comparing the memory addresses and not the string. This is why it's important to make sure that we're using either compare to or equals if we want to compare the values of the strings and not the values of the variables. Because this line right here is only going to compare the memory addresses. I see students all the time trying to compare strings by using this, and it looks like it's true because if they do this comparison, it's going to say, oh, it's true, so that's fine. But it's better to use compare to or equals when trying to compare the values. So string 1 dot equals string 2 is clearly going to be true because both strings contain the exact same letters. Now here's where the issue lies and why it's important to make sure that we're using compare to or equals instead of trying to do direct relational operators. So let's say I have the following lines. String 3 equals new string hello and string 4 equals new string hello. Both strings are now going to create separate string objects, even though the data is the same. What that means is both string 3 and string 4 are going to contain completely different memory addresses. Now, if I use the equals method or the compare to method, they're still going to tell me that they have the same data because they're comparing the letters and the characters in there. But if I try to compare the values of the variables themselves, they're going to have different memory addresses, so they will evaluate the false. So the moral of the story is, if you want to compare the strings, make sure you're using either compare to or equals. Do not try to use the relational equality operator because you're going to get inaccurate results.